right, everyone, let's tap in together today. I'm so happy that you're here as we are in this new era, this threshold, this Neptune in Aries for one era. So many things astrologically are changing, and Neptune into Aries is a big one. And it obviously has many different connotations, many different meanings. One of them I like is bringing truth, Neptune, into life, Aries. And this is something that I really want to do with this podcast. And I'm so honored, so glad, so thankful for the people, the authors who are here to, give us their take on what we need to do in this life and what's the meaning and how we can remember our wholeness. For me, it's all about that. Our wholeness. Neptune is about that. And when it's together with Aries, it's about you. It's about me. It's about the character that we are building here now together with, well, both the collective, like I said, it means many things, but also the spiritual truth. So for me, it definitely means reorienting a little bit, adjusting what I thought was going to be to maybe something a little bit different, including this intro, including starting my podcast a little bit different. And of course, that invitation is extended widely and open for you as well to just look at your life and what could be maybe a little bit different. Does it still feel authentic to you? Is the question from me, at least, and maybe from Neptune as well. And so with these words, these overall words, I want to introduce you to our guest today that I'm really thankful for. I'm getting this feeling like the first interview that I did on this podcast with Thomas More, who has written so many books. It's sort of the thing here where it's like where to start because there's so much knowledge, there's so much wisdom. So we'll see where it takes us. Our guest is Caitlín Matthews. And I want to read the introduction. It says on her Substack, where it's one of the places that she's writing. It says, exploring myth, ancestral traditions, divination, and Western mysteries. And Caitlín is a writer, an author, a prolific one. And I'm looking forward to hear more about you and your work in the world. Caitlín, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mana. It's lovely to be here on Wednesday afternoon. Yes, indeed. When you work from home, it's very difficult to remember the days of the week. So, and it's probably not a great advantage that I'm not an astrologer.
You are so many other things, right?
I
I
do a
mean,
few other things, yes.
a few other things. Oh man, is it 100? I think I read 150 books.
No, that's not me. That's my husband. I've written 85. I have been doing this since 1980, which is quite a long time ago now. So I didn't write them all at once, and some of them are reprints or revisions, and most of them are out of print. So
Okay, so I mean, where should we start with all of your works? I just started, I propose starting a new cycle and readjusting and figuring out, a new maybe spiritual practice. I just started studying the Kabbalah, and that's also, I mean, you are into tarot. And where do we want to start with introducing us to your work, to your great work? You are Capricorn, so.
well, yeah, I love so many things. It's true, and I've had the privilege of being able to do very many of them in my life. So which is wonderful. But I mean, my major love still is always the wisdom that's in the land, whether that's held in the land itself or whether it's in oral tradition, in the singing and the stories, or whether it's in the myths and legends that are held by the land. And I just feel that there's so much about Northwest Europe, which we're all on one tectonic plate together, and it's like there is like one spirit, that looks after all of us, but we each have our own particular character in our lands throughout Northwest Europe. But we're all very closely related, yes, in so many ways. So um, it just feels good to acknowledge that while we're talking, to say, that it's not just very national here or very national there. And yes, of course, we have those things that only our country does, like
Mhm.
we eat Marmite. The only other people on earth who enjoy such a thing are people who are in Australia, but they did come from here, yes.
Mhm.
They have a different kind of Marmite, which is called Vegemite. But so I think those little connections between us. Um, there are larger ones and there are smaller ones, and that's always been my study. And because my mother's family was Irish and my father's family was British, I had this wonderful privilege of having both sides. And I call them the sister islands because we don't just have these two big islands next to each other, but of course all the little islands that live around them, which have their own traditions and stories, and so on.
Mhm. So you've really dedicated your life to studying and then sharing about different traditions. Could you put it like that?
Well, I mean, I think sitting with the land, I mean, where should I start? I suppose I should start by saying I was born very short-sighted. So
Okay.
I, I mean, even at the distance I am from my screen, which is what, 2 feet, um, I couldn't recognize people.
Mhm.
Yeah. So as a young child, before I could read, I learned how to sing into spaces. And of course, that's
Okay.
good because it shows you where the dog is standing and where the piano is and where the
Mhm.
bookshelf is and so on. But of course, it also shows you what isn't there.
Singing like then you would feel the vibration.
Yes, so it's like bats or whales. It's echolocation. And
Uh-huh.
so I was doing echolocation from quite a young age, and that showed me what was not visible, but also there.
Mhm.
So I think
Mhm.
this is where a lot of my, this begins because I didn't grow up in a household with many books, but I had this incredible understanding of what was around me that, of course, you couldn't talk to other people about because
Mm.
my parents were not understanding any of this. They just thought,
Okay.
and imagination was a very dangerous thing. That was always my father saying that.
Yeah, this is very different. This is interesting because some people who've done what you've done, filled their life with this, it's because they come out of an heritage, where their folks were in it, were in some kind of tradition, or but for you, the opposite.
Yeah,
Like you,
yes, you can see I have a room full of books, but I only had 3 books of my own as a child before the age of 9.
okay,
And my parents didn't have any except, I think, a cookery book, an engineering book, and a book on child rearing. Yes, so
wow,
so nothing to read. So I was in these acres of boredom when there was nothing to do. Uh,
yeah,
so in those big spaces, there was much more. But in those spaces, there were the spirits that came and talked to me. So not in a spiritualist sense, but much more like in your. We were talking about the nixies, the nisa, um,
yeah,
the little beings who are our neighbors and who live around us. Um, and if I had questions or thoughts or I was wondering about something, I couldn't go to a book and look it up. I couldn't ask my parents because they didn't know. I would just ask them. And they said, oh, it's like this. So I had this complete other understanding, which of course gradually has come together, over the years in a different way. And yes, I have done ordinary research as well. I've actually, read manuscripts and translated things and so on. But um, but there is a level at which those things come together.
yeah,
Um, and
yeah. By studying and by getting into,
but it's
yeah,
like our whole world is in the present time is very worrying because you were talking about truth and how we understand truth, and it's like we now seem to live in a world where, this side of reality, the bit that we see, feel, hear, and touch, is all that there is.
Mm.
But actually, I would say the other side's really important too.
Yeah.
And like all weaving, weaving is made, from the mixture of two sets of fibers running across each other. And if we say only one half of this exists, I would be standing here naked. And a lot of our world at the moment seems to be standing naked. Yeah. So not covered with anything, and also with a sort of a transparency which is pretty clear to most of us now that the truth is not being told.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think, the our worldview, um, as Western people, as people who live in a modernist culture, um, that we have to sort of go back and do a bit more listening to what is underneath this. What did our ancestors do in these circumstances? You know, each age has its own problems and difficulties, but our one really needs to discover what there is, because AI is following behind. Um, as a writer, I have problems with this, obviously, because several of my books have been used to model AI things. It's on
Have they?
lib.
How do you know that? Have someone told you that?
If you go on libgen, libgen, you can look up anyone's books and see whose have been used for training AI.
Okay.
So I have problems with that. I have no problems with them looking at my X-rays and telling me that there are things that the human eye could not see. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with anyone using AI to unfurl the Herculaneum scrolls from Pompeii and to read what they say. I think that's fantastic.
Hmm.
But we're now living in a world where AI is recreating things, but are they the truth? And people can't always tell now. So I think this two-way vision is really still very important for us, whichever discipline we bring to it. So because the Kabbalah gives us a different kind of view of the world, which is a much bigger one, which can apply to everything that we're doing in life, and things in our history and things in our future, that we can look at from this eternal perspective.
Yes. Oh, I love that. The eternal perspective. Yeah. Yeah. So how do you live with all of that mystical knowledge that you have? How do you integrate it? And it's so vast, right?
It is, but it's also like the world is vast, but we don't personally know about everything. I can't do differential calculus or algebra or things like that, and I'm not worried about that. I don't need to understand electricity at a scientifically knowledgeable level. Yes, I would trust that it works. And we do that every time we get into any kind of vehicle. It moves, engineers have designed it. We know more or less what it will do in what conditions, whether it's snowing or sunny or whatever, all those things. So all of those things are there all the time, and we don't need to have all of them. But if we have a question, and I suppose this takes us into the era of divination, because all divination is about asking the question. And we all understand about you want to look up a car, say, and you want to look up an Aston Martin from 1963 with a blue trim, and you can look it up. If you just write cars into a search engine, I mean, you'll die in the rush of too much information, yes? But if
Yeah.
you write in, 1963 Aston Martin with a blue trim, there's only a few hundred entries. But the whole of divination is exactly like this. If we ask an exact question, then the aperture through which we view it can be very particular. Like the old cameras that the aperture could be moved by the f-stops. So if you really wanted to focus on something, your question has to be really exact. because that's where the information is coming. If you make the aperture too big, it's too much information.
That's a really good point. I recognize that. Yeah, it's a really good point. So when I ask you, how do you integrate all of that? How do you live with all of this? What you're saying is it's about the specific question or the specificity of the question. Then you can apply it to your life.
I think so. And obviously, we live within a whole state of different laws and conditions. I mean, we understand it's received knowledge throughout the world that we don't eat people. We don't. We're not cruel to children. You know, there are certain things we can all understand, and that throughout the world they will be the same. But then, when you look at things just like marriage, I mean, that's very different around the world. You know, if we go back in time and you're a Mormon, you can have lots of wives. You know, if you, I mean, we go to a Lebanese restaurant near where we live, and we often go there with a friend or with my agent, and my husband gets all kind of looks because I think they think he just has three wives because we go there so often, but he comes with different members of his,
Right.
you know, so we look at sort of how things are arranged. They're arranged differently in different places, but, and that's just what from one side, our side of life, our side of reality. But if we look at an eternal perspective of something, it's a very different thing, isn't it? And there are certain things, I suppose, that question that the woman at the well asks of Jesus, you know, and she said, "Okay, so I've had all these husbands, and you know, which one of them will I be with in heaven?" And he said, "Well, it's not quite like that.
It's not quite like that. No.
It isn't." So I think, you know, the areas that we look at, the things that interest us, the questions that trouble us, those are the things that shape the question
Mhm.
for us. I'm very interested in how divination is not just about me, but about, you know, about you, about the people who live in the world, about the animals that live in the world, about, you know, how things are for trees and grass and sea and so on. And I think we should be going back to more traditional methods of looking at these very big questions, because at the moment, you know, everyone who did a predictive reading for, say, March of this year, um, may have discovered there were some strange things in it that they couldn't understand. And the reasons for those are are because of what has happened since, and that we live in a system within a constellation of many things going on, and they have effect on us, just as we have effect on them. And so I remember speaking to my friend who is an astrologer, and I was sort of saying, "Have you done your work for March?" Because she does a big prediction for March. And she said, "I don't know, it's going to be very strange. I'm not sure we're going to like it." You know, which was her first view of that. But,
Mm.
and she is American herself, so
Right. Yeah. But you also talk about this new era, this new time, and how to relate to it in the. I've read that on Substack, the writings you've done there. And you have a piece where you talk about, I'm just gonna, we didn't discuss really in detail what we were going to talk about today. So I just, maybe you remember it, maybe you don't. But I remember you wrote something about how the context of your spiritual practice is important.
yeah, exactly.
Could you
Because
share something about that?
yeah, exactly. Um, I should say that people who come to teachings that I do, I do fully expect them to have a spiritual practice already rolling, that they should already be in the car with what they're doing. Yes, I don't care whether it's embracing a tree every morning or singing in the bath or whatever they do. I don't care how they approach that, but I do
Mm.
want them to do it, because we can't go forward together otherwise, and the work can't be held well. Um, and I suppose that for some people, and in that particular post for Substack, I was writing for people who have no particular spiritual tradition or who are just kind of adrift in the world, and what kind of spiritual practice might they have. And I suppose for them it would mean more about their relationship with the world around them, which is the seen world as well as the unseen world.
Mhm.
Because we all have unseen worlds, even if we don't have a spiritual tradition. We know we have ancestors, for example, you know.
Mhm.
We know we'll have children. So there are other perspectives to everything we do. And if we are genuinely living in a world where we think this life is all that there is, then um, that's going to lead to some very poor results in the short term as well as the very long term, because we don't consider the decisions we make now, how they will affect people. And we all want governments to understand how to do that.
Mm.
Indigenous cultures the worldwide have never had problems with this, have they? They've always done this. You know, before they institute a new thing, they think about how will this impact my grandchildren, my great great grandchildren, to the seventh or ninth generation, because you know, living memory is about 4 generations of people, perhaps, but we also have to add on like 2 extra ones either side because our grandparents were alive in our lifetime and they remembered 2 or 3 more generations, and so will our children.
Mhm.
So, so that cogency, that cohesion of understanding is what a spiritual practice will bring to life, so that we don't live thoughtlessly, we don't live um, beyond the boundaries of what is good for both ourselves and for the world around us. And that's one
Mhm.
of the reasons on Substack why I've been um, putting up a course based on Hierocles' golden verses, which are really a Pythagorean teaching from, um, so it's a teaching that's 25 centuries old about how we live and how we do that.
Oh, please share more about that. I'm really intrigued.
It's 72 verses, and it's kind of like it's like a vademecum, a sort of take me with you concordance of how to live, and it starts off in a way that is quite difficult for people because it sort of says, you know, honor first the immortal gods, yes, and then it says, you know, honor the oath, and by the oath they're talking about the things we've just been talking about, the things we all understand we should do, which we have to obey,
Mm.
because they have consequences for ourselves and for everyone. And it says, no, honor the great heroes and the daimons, the spirits, the guardian spirits that look after you. Um, honor your parents and your close relatives. Honor your friend. Have a good friend that looks out for you and isn't afraid to tell you what you're doing wrong. So very, very sort of how we're connected to life, like a spider's web, you know?
Mhm.
The spider, the spiders in Northwest Europe, because they spin different kinds of webs elsewhere, but they usually put the long threads in to make their web, and then they do windy, 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 yes? But those long threads are really important, and it's like if we don't have those long threads in first, we can't weave our web, we can't tell our story.
Mm.
So, so it sort of begins that way, and it goes on to more difficult things. I've just been um, looking at part 3 of the course has been about all the difficult things about, you know, you're going to die, and your possessions are here now, but they might be gone tomorrow, things like that. So difficult.
Yeah,
Um,
those are the difficult parts for
really
sure.
difficult things. And I seem to have landed, you know, myself in my own personal circumstances into sort of various parts of those at the moment. So they've been like my personal homework.
Yeah.
this this particular one, but and also, you know, what do you do when fate, you know, puts, gives you blows so strong that you can barely stand up. So it asks some very important questions. Uh, and I'm glad I'm going on to the verses that talk about how not to be persuaded by the things people say, which seems to be really well timed for the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
it's not just about how we're reactive on Facebook, is it now? It's about how we understand what people have said or written, or the adverts that come and, flicker at us from our screens. What is happening? Um, so I think these verses are really incredibly important, and they were put together by people living a philosophic way of life in
Okay.
Pythagoras' time, and these verses were spoken aloud every night by them and every morning. And the Stoics did it too. So it goes through time. Lots and lots of people. It went into the Islamic world as well. So I feel they're really important for very confusing times that we're now living in.
Yes. I mean, yeah. Oh, so many different ways,
Yeah.
right, to receive guidance.
Yes.
And you also have a lot of wisdom on the Lenormand
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
tarot cards. I don't know if you call them tarot as well, but it is
Not tarot
Lenormand
cards, but
cards.
in French they're called the petit jeux, the little games, the little cards, which are good, and they're just one of several of the little cards that began to be used. And most of those arose from little games like conversation cards, which were cards that had little pictures on them that showed people getting married, or um, people talking together, or allegorical figures like fortune or love, and so on. And there would be people would sit round the table and they would tell a long story. So, you might get the card of love and I'd have to follow it, and I've got an old man in my hand, so as to say, But he's a widow now and he doesn't have any love in his life now. So that was how those kind of card games began. But then in 1770, a man called Atelier, who was the first person to write a book on how to divine with cards. So the first how to divine book with cards, drew on these meanings, and he began to fashion a how to read fortunes with a pack of playing cards. And from those came lots and lots of small oracles. So the Lenormand oracle is one of them, which has 36 cards. Um, and in Germany there was Kipper, and also there were the Sevilla cards. I've just been working with them today, and whoops, they're not very easy to see against this. But
Mm.
it's a lady who's
So,
looking through a telescope.
so
Um,
would you say is it a separate tradition than tarot cards?
oh, it's completely different, yes, because
Okay, okay, good. Okay.
tarot, I mean, tarot has a different history, obviously, because it comes
Yeah.
from the 15th century, um, and it became magical in the 18th century, and now we read tarot cards mostly from the images on the cards, whereas these small cards, yes, they have images on them, but they're read it's more like a linguistic system. Yeah. So they're like placeholders for lots of meanings. So I'm just trying to think what I have here. So I have here, this is a Vera Sibilla card of two people meeting in a wood.
Yeah.
And so obviously it's a card for meeting, it's a card for reconciliations, negotiation. It's also a card for the countryside because it shows the country. It has lots of other meanings. And of course, if it's upside down, it's different.
Mm. What I've heard is, and please correct me, what I've heard is that it's more concrete with the Lenormand cards. It's like this is what it means, and in tarot cards you could be more intuitive about it as well.
I think tarot speaks pretty clearly. It depends on
Sure.
nature, because I have a cartomantic mind, so I'm used to reading with these older systems. So, and older systems of reading are quite different because, of course, tarots didn't. The only pictures on tarots were on the court cards and the people cards, and on the 22 major cards. The rest of them were like playing cards. They just had pips on the
Like sticks and different
yeah.
elements. Yeah.
So you would have to learn to read them in a very different way. So I don't have that problem. I don't have airy fairy reading. I read very concretely.
Right. Okay. You always read concretely. Okay. Great.
Yeah, very
Okay.
concretely. I think that's what they are.
So would you say one is, I mean, is one preferred than the other in terms of what you want to ask? Or
Um,
is it just different ways to guidance?
I think that that you can divine by raindrops running down the window, or from sheep droppings. I mean, really. I mean, these are just two systems that I know about in the world.
Okay, okay.
The
Yeah.
Mongolians read from the droppings of sheep. So, it's about the question.
Yeah, it's about the Christian.
Always about the question, whatever else. And then the criteria of the reading is, uh, you know, answers the question. And you can do, I mean, I've done this myself. I remember many years ago that our son was about 5 or 6, and I thought it was time for him to go and do an errand by himself. So I said, I need a bottle of milk. Please go to the corner shop. And we'd rehearsed going there many times. So there was one road to cross. And so I knew he could go. I gave him the money, and then he didn't come back for a long time. And then my husband came into the room and said, where is our son? And I said, I've sent him to the corner shop. And he said, you did what? so I said, I know he's okay. I mean, I'm his mother, so I know he's okay. I can feel he's okay. And he didn't believe me. So I said, look. And I got the TV buttons and I turned on the television. Because I'd asked, where is my son? That was my question. Where is my son? And the television came on, and it was in the middle of an advert for army recruitment. And the army recruiting officer had his hand on the mother's shoulder and he was saying, don't worry, lady. He'll be fine with us. He's with friends.
You turned on the television right at the time where
That
the
is
sentence goes out.
so
That's,
that was like, that's what
yeah.
the Greeks would call a claydon. It's something you hear. Yeah, so it was an oracle nevertheless. And it was absolutely correct, because what had happened is he'd gone towards the corner shop, met with the friend and he went playing in the playground.
Of course.
I
Of
didn't
course.
get my bottle of milk, so that was fine. But I knew he was fine, and I knew, and that just confirmed it. Yeah,
Okay.
but that's the
Uh,
way I live. I live like that. So if I,
yeah.
so why hasn't so and so phoned me, or why are they not at the bus stop where I've come to collect them? And I will ask that question and get an answer from something around me.
Mm. Yeah, so it's a
Like
complete,
the lorry goes by and it says a very fast delivery, and then some kind of logo that gives me an idea of what's happened.
yeah.
We cover all kinds of breakdown. I think, okay, the bus is
Mm.
broken down. So,
So reading the
yeah, so if
signs.
I need to read, I don't always need to do that. I can sometimes just get a sense of, in the same way, I'm sure everyone's done this. Your friend comes and says, I love horror films, and there's a great new horror film on at the cinema. And if someone says that to me, I do an immediate, what I call ping back. I go, ooh, towards the cinema. And then I just like, it's echolocation again. And then I get the sound of the ping and it goes, which is like, no, I don't want to see this film. They said, why not? You've not read anything about it. You didn't even know the title when I told you. And it's like, no, I know, I just won't enjoy it. Yeah. If
So
the ping back had gone, ding, I'd have gone, yeah, that sounds fantastic.
is it metaphorical or do you actually say that sound?
Literally just get the sense of it.
Okay.
It's the same way as you would, I mean, people do this all the time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think it's just that you're giving words to something that is a common phenomena, but to give words to it, it's
but it's like, when someone said, wasn't it strange? My sister from Australia called, And,
Yeah.
I've just been thinking of her the moment
Yeah. Yeah.
before. And it's like, well, no, if you think about it, your sister in Australia she did a, is she in? Yes, she is in. I can phone her now. That's good. And had
Yeah.
phoned. And because she'd picked up the sister, thinking about her. Yeah.
And so when you don't meet each other on the phone, I mean, when you disconnect, like you keep calling each other, and the other person is not there, is there a lack of intuition?
Not necessarily. I mean, maybe something intervened. If someone's thinking of calling you and you pick them up, and then suddenly their dog was sick on the carpet, they would have to go and sort that out. But I don't know. The world has many variables in it, and that's
Sure. Yeah.
divination, isn't it? That you say, I have just given you a snapshot of your question, but
Yeah.
you may decide to do different things. Other things may happen which will change that. Like the Icelandic volcano, whose name I can't pronounce. When no plane could fly, yes, people made plans, but they couldn't fulfill them.
Mm,
No plane could fly. So,
no,
there's always stuff going
there's always that. Yeah. I,
on.
I wanted to ask you about what you talked about earlier, the unseen world. You said we all have unseen worlds.
Yeah.
So, yeah, how can we get that more into an embodied sense? I have an unseen world, and you mentioned ancestors. And can you say more about each of our unseen worlds? I feel it's a really good match to Neptune.
Well, obviously, I can't talk for all people, but just in an ordinary way,
Yeah.
we know things that are not told to us, that they are being told to us on a different level. So, for example, if I explain what my house looks like to you, if I give you a verbal description, and then you come to my house, and it will look different from how you have envisaged it, but it will feel the same. Yeah. So my house has already existed in your world in my verbal description.
Right. Like your
You've already
description gives me
encountered.
an inner representation almost of it.
Yes, you've had an encounter with it, and then you
Mm.
can actually physically come, and then you recognize it. Um, um, in the same way you could walk past a house and know that the person was not in, because the house feels empty.
Mm.
And there is nothing about
Yeah.
the home. And I'm not saying, the curtains are hanging down in shreds, and, there are like 5,000 milk bottles on the doorstep or anything. But it's just, it's an ordinary house, just no one is in. You just know.
Mm.
There is no resonance coming from within it. But I think also that we also pick up those other worlds in different ways. We pick them up in terms of place. I don't know if you've seen a lot of those programs that we do here called Who Do You Think You Are? Which is when they look at someone's ancestry. And I'll tell you that nearly every program there will be one part where the person that they're interviewing is they have to sort of show up at different venues, and they meet an expert and they say, and here your grandfather had a fish and chip shop, in this very street. And then the person just looks bewildered and says, well, I've never been here before in my life, except when I was in my 20s and I had a flat just over the road from here. So it's like the place memory of people is quite remarkable and ancestral, because every single person, I don't, you know who Judi Dench is, yes? She's a great actress. And they did one for her. And guess where they took her back to? They took her back to Elsinore. And they
I,
said,
I actually don't know that actress.
Well, she's a Shakespearean actress. She's
Okay.
been absolute. She was in the James Bond movies
Oh, okay.
and they did all her ancestry, and they'd sort of said, you're now going to go to Elsinore. And she said, what, you mean like Hamlet, Elsinore? And they said, yeah. And so there she was at Elsinore, and then the expert said, did you know that your ancestor actually served here? She was actually one of the maids in waiting of one of the queens. at Elsinore Castle. And she just nearly, she was so delighted. It was incredible. But
It's really wild. That's really wild. And I'm thinking about this is just the stories that we have. Then there's all the stories that we don't have access to because they were not told, they were not written down.
no, and yet we still do them. And I remember having a student who is born in this country, went to New Zealand as a 2-year-old, came back to live in Scotland, and then really concerned herself really seriously in education at a really, very deep level. And she finally met up with a relative who told her that one of her great grandfathers had been the first person to start a university in Canada and had been part of the system of education in this incredibly serious, deep way. So she's still fulfilling an ancestral vocational skill, in that way. So, and I just feel that sometimes people reach through time to us.
Yeah.
And they do it not just because they're ancestors, but, everyone who goes to, say, the Tower of London gets a little shiver because horrible things have happened there. Yes, it's a prison. It used to be a royal palace, but it became a prison. Um, so I think, those kinds of things are normal. But you have to ask the questions. Am I feeling like this because this is happening to me? Is it because I've just spoken to someone? Is it because something happened here? We have to be very discerning with our questions to
Mm.
narrow things down. But sometimes we get a sense of dread. And you think, what is this? Where is this coming from? Is this someone undergoing something now? Is it, what is it? Yes. Um, so I think, we know that people pick up, say, disasters that are going to happen. Lots of people have dreams beforehand. They get a sense. And one of my students was out in the Southeast Asia when the tsunami came, and she'd gone there for Christmas, and she has teenage daughters, and they had Christmas on Christmas Day, and she wouldn't let the girls go to the beach because it was Christmas and they should stay together as a family, right?
Mhm.
And then the next day, she she had the girls saying, "Please, please, please, can we go to the beach?" And she said, "No, no, I don't want you to go to the beach today," which is thank God that she didn't, because they would have been carried away or died, who knows. Um, but she may have known that from lots of things, because I know as one of my students, she'd have gone out at the beginning of the day and she would have looked at the world, been in that place, and she would have looked at what nature was doing. Yeah. Because animals know that things are coming. And indeed, there's an island that's in the middle. It's where Stone Age like people are still living, and no one is allowed to go there. And they were worried that they had been swept away or injured by the tsunami, and the officials got a helicopter and overflew the island, and were met with a rain of spears. So they just thought, okay, they're still alive. That's okay. We don't have to go there. But of course, those islanders would have looked at what the animals were doing. Yeah? They would have noticed that the animals were going to higher ground, or that the
Mm.
birds were behaving differently, or many things. But I think certainly my student would have been doing that.
Okay, I just have a silly question for you. Do you think birds in the city still have that instinct?
Oh, I think birds have all the instincts of their ancestors.
Even like city birds. I'm just thinking about where I live, where we have so many birds in the city, and they're just like, I feel like they are not in their natural habitat, of course, and they're always risking being, our bikes are driving so fast and aggressively. So, yeah,
They learn new behavior when they have different habitat. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, just yesterday I'd put out the spent cat food for the hedgehogs, just in case there were any around. And a few minutes later, a seagull came down and took it. So it's like the seagulls have got very clever. They're
Yeah.
We now have seagulls in Britain that can go into a supermarket with sliding doors, find
Right.
the exact sandwich that they want, and
Yeah, okay.
outside, they push it through the sliding doors, and then they peck it open and eat it. But they won't choose another kind of sandwich that they don't want.
Okay, so it's still that instinct. Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, I think
Okay. Okay, so the unseen world, I'm really inspired by that wording of it because then
it's
so
interesting.
what sorry?
The unseen world is always around us and with us, and if we don't pay attention to it, how are we to know things? Yeah? Especially if you're wearing headphones and walking along the street, you may not be able to hear what's happening, or to understand what's happening. So yeah, um, those unseen stories are with us, and of course there are the stories we're being told. Yes, from our experience of that. So um, I mean, I have a shamanic practice here in Oxford, and so I'm seeing people who've had um, lots of different experiences, and problems which can't be dealt with by ordinary means. And so my job is to find out, what went wrong ancestrally, what is still going on ancestrally that needs to come to a stop, because the um, effect of that is still rolling through um, the family line, whether it's an illness or a kind of behavior, um, or an understanding about yourself which is not rational. Yes, there are lots of things like that which nobody ever deals with.
It is crazy. I mean, it's crazy with those connections between us biologically. So but you've had a shamanistic practice for what, 35 years, I think you
Yes.
texted me. Yeah. How yeah, how is that important to you in your life? I mean, it's a big question, I know.
Oh,
I'm trying to ask specific questions here, but I'm overwhelmed by the
I mean,
experience you have.
whether it's sort of important to my life, it's definitely important to the lives of those that I see.
Yeah.
Put it that way round, because I think that's the when you've been to all the doctors and all the psychotherapists and they can't help you, and they begin to get cross with you because you're not healing, which is a thing that people don't also talk about very much, but doctors are quite good at showing their anger at your failure to heal, which I'm sorry I hear quite a lot about. Um, and it's really that they've done all they can, they've reached the limits of their competence. They can give as much psychotherapy as someone can take, but it doesn't take away what's going on. Then we need to turn to other means. Yes.
Yeah.
And so we have to go to the unseen world, because we've tried to heal it this side of the world in time. But actually, most of those things that are really mysterious have to be healed in timelessness, which is where, just the unseen world is timelessness. So that means we can always go to the point that we need to go to find what is missing, what has been going on, um, who has been doing what to whom, whatever it is, and to deal with those things. Um, I was just talking to my friend Imelda Armsquist, who's also a shamanic practitioner, and she was just writing this week about organ donation and the different rules there are for terminating someone's life, and does that mean it's painless? It does is how would that work? How do we define death? All of those questions, and I just put on the end of her something she'd written on this, that very many times I've had to go and visit people whose machine is being turned off on Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock. Yes, to say it's time to go now, because they're more in the unseen world than they are in our world.
Mm.
They have life signs. They're attached to machines and so on. You can see that their breathing is happening. You can take their blood pressure, all of those things. Um, but if they enter into a persistent vegetative state where they're the brain is alive, but it's not. It's like a weaving that's got lots of holes in it now. So if they came back into consciousness again, they couldn't live well.
Mm.
They would have to
Mm.
get institutionalized.
Yeah, more connected
They
to
are
the
benefit
invisible.
side. It's not a good thing to keep them in this state, to let them go. Yeah. So I've had to do that very many times, um, with things. So so I suppose, that this kind of work where we go into timelessness, and shamanism's not the only one that does that, but it is, it's sometimes necessary to make bring things into balance, again, not in any kind of magical way, but just to try and bring balance to, things that are out of balance, and, in a bad way.
I have a couple of questions for all of that, Kathleen. Okay, so you said I have had to do that many times. What did you have to do in
I
determine if someone is?
into the spirit of the person. Yeah, I talked about visiting the cinema. That was a quick one, but
Yeah.
but in this case, I would do a formal journey. I'd actually send out part of my soul to visit that person and to actually consult with them, because their relative has consulted with doctors, but they've not been able to talk to someone in a coma. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, like that. Yeah.
So it is only courtesy to go to the person whose life it is to say, "How are you? What do you want to have happen? Is there anything you need to say or to have done?" So that they can be ready.
Mm.
But very,
Mm.
very often when I've done this, I've spoken to, someone, and I've actually said, do you want to carry on living? And in many cases, people have said, no, I would like to go now. But there's a relative who doesn't want person to go. They want them to still live, and they may be the one relative whose consent is required. And I remember once getting a message from a woman who was like this, and I was told very particular that if her husband went to the loft in the attic and brought down the old typewriter and typed for her a letter of goodbye, she would just be able to go. It's like nothing would have to be done. She would just know that she had his consent to go. And I still don't know the end of that story, because all I could do was be the messenger. Yeah.
Right.
She'll be alive, I don't know.
You don't know what they decided to do.
Oh, and I would imagine not, because she'd had a very, very serious accident. So I think she would not have come back from it. She was ready to go, but
Mm.
and of course in timelessness there's no time. So we
Mm.
think of someone as being in that sort of state for many months, but for her it would have just been now.
Mm.
Yeah.
Ah, this is excellent. This is, I think, many people recognize that this dying person is holding on. Maybe it's not a person who's actually dying, but just really old and could go at any time. But then they're holding on because of, like you said, a relative who somehow needs them.
Well, I mean, my own mother, was very ill, and in hospital, and I already knew, without having to do anything particular, I knew she was holding on for my father because they'd never been apart, and so, I had to take my dad to one side and say, "You're now going to have to let her go," and say, "It's okay, you will be able to manage,"
Mhm.
and that's what he did. Yeah.
And then you have this excellent point.
Yes, that she
It's
was ready to die.
and you said like she is in timelessness. I mean, already.
She was in and out of consciousness. The
Okay.
medication was just keeping her below the surface. Like very often you see in hospital, they over medicate people, not for pain, but to just sort of keep them manageable. And so she was like skimming the surface, just below the surface. She wasn't in a deep state, but she was in a very, very bad way.
Mm.
They'd operated on her liver and they'd left her open, anyone to whom that's done should have died pretty quickly because they wanted to operate, and she had very clearly said, "I do not want any more surgery. I want to go."
Oh,
Um,
I'm sorry about that.
so the
Sounds really tough.
medical establishment had that information, but she hadn't had it from my father. So yeah. So I think these things may sound crazy to people when they're listening, but it's actually this is the way of life that we have to. How do we learn about the things we cannot know?
Yeah.
So I suppose a lot of my life has been about exploring that in lots of different ways. And
I believe so. Yeah, and we're just about to wrap up here, but I just wanted to hear a comment on when you said there are many ways. Shamanism is one way to, I guess, work in timelessness, connect to it, or how you would word that. But what? Yeah, is that possible for anyone listening somehow to
I think
tap into that space?
how we perceive things and learning how we perceive things is really important because the way we receive information, most people don't know how they perceive things. If you ask an artist, how did you see that vase? Yes, there'll be lots of answers to that. But very often artists are told not to look at the vase, but to look at the space around the vase when they're being taught. And I suppose that's a very similar way of learning what someone has with them. Yeah. Why is Jim so angry and annoying these days? Is a question you might hear from friends. And if you looked at the space around him, you might be able to tell.
Mm.
Um, I often do that for people who I'm going to be seeing but I haven't met yet because they made an arrangement with me online through an email. I usually like to hear people's voice because I can diagnose from their voice. But sometimes I just have close my eyes and I just sort of see what's with them, what's accompanying them, because they're not just bringing a problem. There's something kind of around them, attached to them, near them.
And what could that be?
Indicative. It could be all sorts of things. It could be someone who's under coercive control, and so there's that person kind of grasping them all the time, holding them. It could be something that someone said to them because when they were young, they were a bit stupid and slow, but actually they just probably, they're on the spectrum. So it may be that all those words and projections on them, it's like a lump on their shoulder. Yeah, it could be all sorts of things. It could be the person who's just been to their boss and thinking they were going to get a promotion, and he said, "Actually, I'm giving you the sack. You can leave." And when you actually ask a person, how did they feel after that? You watch what someone says, and they'll say things like, "I just felt like stabbed in the back." Okay,
Right.
people diagnose themselves very readily.
So, okay, so if I were to say it feels like being stabbed in the back, would that show up in my
Yeah,
energy field? Is that what you're talking about?
yeah,
The experience of,
yeah.
yeah, bleeding in the back or something.
I just had someone this week, and I said, "How do you feel?" She said, "I feel like I'm being devoured."
Devoured.
It's very specific. Yeah. And, the work that we did showed that, there was an intrusion in the family, something that was attached to the family, which afflicted not just her, but other members of her family. And it was like men's appetite.
Men's appetite. Yeah.
That's kind of what it came to. It was part of their family story, but it was like, yeah. But her sense was like, I'm being eaten, and all her dreams were about being eaten. Yeah.
So I feel you have a real point here around how I think you've mentioned that a few times. I'm just putting it together now, like how we're interwoven, and you were mentioning the spider web. And so the story that I'm in is connected to many other people potentially.
Yeah, indeed, and also, the power that holds us in life are the things that we love. So if I said to someone, where are your long threads attached? They would say, oh, my dog, I couldn't do anything without my dog, or my music, or whatever, or it would be, the fact that this person is alive at the same time as me, all of those things. And that's where we attach, and that's what keeps us alive. And in the same way, that when we walk through a spider's web, the spider has to repair the long thread first, which is why nothing can repair, the thread when you have a great loss.
Mm.
Lose the one you love, when you lose your dog, when you can't hear the music anymore,
Yeah.
when the person, that you've loved all your life has decided he wants a newer model and has gone off with someone else.
And
So
you say you can't prepare that, then what do you do?
you can't repair those things. Those are bereavements. We all
Yeah.
understand that loss is loss. And I get very cross when people say, "Oh, we can replace and make up for loss." People do, but it's usually called addiction if they're going to go down that obsessive route, and that's not a
Yeah.
healthy way to heal. First of all, we have to grieve,
Mm.
and
Mm.
we don't do the grieving anything like enough properly in one place.
Mhm.
The first 2 years of a loss is the most serious, and I see so many people who have been given compassionate leave from work, and they come in and it's maybe 2 months after someone very near to them has died. And people at work are still saying to them, you're looking really miserable. You should kind of cheer up. I just get so angry.
Yeah, me too.
I really do. I just can't, you know. And in the
I
olden
want to have the emotions that I have.
we used to wear clothes that told people that, so that they would,
Mm.
they could see if you were in black or if you'd gone into lavender, which women did in the 19th century to show they were coming out of mourning. But people would be very kind to them. I had a friend that went to Turkey, and she wanted something to put over her head because it was difficult traveling in a Muslim country without. So she went into a shop, bought the first headscarf, and she put it on. And everywhere she went, people were so kind to her. She said, I couldn't believe it. And, I would go into a cafe and to ask the way, and they said, oh, please sit down. And they would bring her a cup of coffee, and, without her pay, they would take no payment. And
Okay.
were really kind to her, in a way that she thought, it's like I got a placard on. And of course, yes, she did. She was wearing the headscarf of a widow.
Okay.
And everybody knew. Everybody knew. So they
Right.
treated her kindly. And, they might feel snappy and angry, but they didn't do that to
Mm. Kathleen, I want to ask you, do you have time for one more question?
her. Yes, go, go.
Okay, I have one. It's a personal question. Because when you talk about ancestry and how we're all related and affecting each other, and you also mentioned even honoring your parents, I think you said something like that. What about the situation where you're not in contact with your family, you're not in alignment with your parents, and there's a conflict or there's a breach, there's a disconnect? What happens from your perspective?
Okay, well, I mean, it depends on the circumstances, but when you can't talk to someone because there's been a conflict of some kind, the thing that you do is you ask your own guardian spirit to speak to that of the other person, and this is the principle of calming the raging elephant. I think they do this in Southeast Asia. Like if the elephant is on the rampage, you don't try and calm the elephant because you just get run over. Yes,
You have a
the
title.
elephant crushes you. But
You have a title on Substack called that, right?
oh, really, I don't know. But anyway, but the monks there have this special practice which is about calming the raging elephant, and it's about first of all they enter into loving kindness, so they become part of loving kindness in their practice, and then they ask the Buddha, they ask to speak to the spirit of the elephant so that it calms down, and that's a good way of going, I think, because sometimes personal contact with those that you are going to be angry with is just inflammatory, yeah, and you don't want to make the fire worse.
Okay, so you would energetically contact.
Yeah, I would just sort of say, just please speak to them and give them whatever it is they need. Not giving an end like that they should talk to me because I'm the mother, you know, or that
Oh,
you should be nice to me because you're my father. You know, not putting a, you know, trying to shape how it goes, but just saying, please speak with them, speak to their soul,
mm,
but not in a coercive way.
mm.
We, you know, coercion doesn't work.
Is it similar to like sharing what's on your heart with them?
Not necessarily, no. It is. Um, it's just being able to speak soul to soul at proxy level. Yes, that my guardian spirit will talk to your guardian spirit, and we leave that conversation to the guardian spirits. They do that. They know what's going on. They have a better perspective than we do because
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I get that. Like
they've got the drone's eye view, the seagull's view of it.
the
Yeah,
seagull's view. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. Leave it to like that higher part of yourself.
yeah.
Yeah.
You believe in higher parts of yourself. I just feel I'm saying
Mm.
who I am. But, you know, I don't feel I have any powers in that respect. But yeah,
So you're saying this is what anyone can do?
anyone can do that.
Mm. That's comforting
Yeah.
and encouraging. Thank you so much for inspiring us for a whole hour here.
Well, we've roamed very widely.
Yes. Yeah, but yeah, I really love your energy and
But we're also getting to know each other as well. So
yes. Yeah, you're very welcome here again, for sure. For sure. Thank you so much for
us.
yeah, sharing with us. And is there anything you want to say in the end?
No, I think I will be quiet now. I think you.
Yes. Let's do that. Let's enter into the stillness.